They said my daughter couldn't hear the killers coming, but she felt every hoofbeat through the earth, saw their faces in water reflections, and knew their names before the sheriff did. When the gang planted dynamite in the bank, the whole town learned that silence isn't weakness. It's a different way of seeing death before it arrives. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The Sierra Nevada foothills in 1878 held secrets deeper than any gold vein, and my daughter Clara understood this better than any hearing soul ever could. She was 9 years old the autumn her world went silent, not born that way, but made so by scarlet fever that burned through her small body like wildfire through dry grass. The fever took her hearing, but sharpened everything else, transforming the loss into something the rest of us were too deaf to understand. We lived on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, a mining settlement that clung to the mountainside like a tick on a dying dog. Our cabin stood at the edge of the placer claims, where the creek ran cold and clear, carrying whispers of gold from the higher elevations. I was Jacob Thornton, 43 years old, withered by sun and sorrow, widowed 5 years past when Clara's mother died, bringing our second child into a world that didn't want him. The boy lived 3 days. Clara survived, but something in her closed after that. Even before the fever took her hearing, she'd become a creature of silence and observation. The morning it happened started ordinary as breath. October dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of copper and rust, the kind of light that made a man believe in second chances. I'd been working the creek bed since first light, knee-deep in frigid water, panning for color, while Clara sat on the bank nearby. She didn't play like other children, no songs, no chatter. Instead, she watched. Her pale blue eyes tracked everything, the way water moved around stones, how light changed the creek's surface, the dance of insects above the current. She developed her own language with me over the 4 years since the fever. Simple signs mostly. Hunger, tired, scared, happy. But more than that, she'd learned to read the world through vibration and sight in ways that made my crude gestures seem like a child scribbling compared to poetry. That morning, I noticed her stiffen. Her hand, which had been trailing in the water, suddenly pressed flat against the earth. Her eyes went wide, not with fear exactly, but with the intense focus of a hunting cat. She turned to me and made a sign we developed danger. Then she pointed toward the trail that led from the higher claims down into town. I straightened, my back protesting, and followed her gaze. Saw nothing. The trail was empty, dusty, and abandoned in the early light. But Clara was insistent. She pressed both palms to the ground, then held up fingers. For what? I signed the question. She made a gesture we'd created for horses, 2 fingers galloping across her other palm. For horses, coming fast. I trusted my daughter's strange senses more than I trusted my own eyes. In the years since losing her hearing, she'd warned me of rock slides before the first stone fell, of storms before the first cloud appeared. She felt the world through channels the rest of us had forgotten existed. Stay here, I said aloud, knowing she'd read my lips. Hide if trouble comes. But Clara shook her head violently. She grabbed my arm and pointed toward town, then made the sign for people, lots of them. Then she made a gesture I didn't understand at first, her hands moving like someone digging, then clutching something precious. Then, her face twisted with the expression of terror. She made a cutting motion across her throat. My blood went cold. Miners. Killed. She was trying to tell me something had happened at the claims above us, and whoever did it was coming down the trail, coming toward town. Coming toward us. The sound of hoofbeats reached my ears about 30 seconds later, distant thunder that grew louder with each breath. Clara had felt them through the earth long before the sound could travel through air. I grabbed her hand and we ran for the cabin, my pan forgotten in the creek, gold dust swirling away in water that suddenly seemed the same color as blood in sunset. We burst through the cabin door just as 4 riders appeared on the trail above. I pulled Clara to the floor, both of us crawling to the window, where I could peer out without being seen. The riders were hard men, the kind the frontier bred like vermin, dust-covered, armed with rifles and revolvers, their faces hidden behind bandanas. But it was what they carried that made my stomach turn. Bulging saddlebags, the kind prospectors used to transport their findings. And blood, dark stains on their clothes, still wet enough to glisten. They'd hit one of the claims above, killed whoever was working it, stolen their gold. And now they were heading into Redemption Creek, likely to disappear into the chaos of the settlement before anyone knew what happened. Clara's hand found mine in the dim cabin. She was trembling, but not with fear, with something else. Fury, maybe. At 9 years old, she'd already learned that the world was cruel to those who couldn't defend themselves. Her small fingers squeezed mine once, hard. Then she pulled away and moved to her corner of the cabin where she kept her treasures. She had a collection of what I'd thought were children's toys. Smooth stones from the creek, pieces of colored glass, a silver hand mirror that had belonged to her mother. But watching her now, I realized these weren't toys. They were tools. Clara held the mirror, angling it to catch the morning light streaming through our window, and I understood. She could see the riders without being seen, could watch them through reflected light while staying hidden. The riders passed our cabin without slowing, heading down toward the main settlement. Through the mirror's reflection, Clara tracked them until they disappeared around the bend. Then she turned to me, and in her eyes I saw something that made me proud and terrified in equal measure. Determination. She'd seen their faces in the mirror's reflection. She knew what they looked like. And somehow, in the silent world she inhabited, she was going to find a way to tell someone what she'd witnessed. I had no idea then that this moment, this morning of blood and stolen gold, would transform my daughter from a child the town pitted into the only person who could save them all. The riders had made a fatal mistake. They'd assumed that silence meant ignorance, that a girl who couldn't hear was a girl who couldn't understand. But Clara had been learning to read the world's secrets in ways they couldn't imagine, and the earth itself was about to teach them the price of underestimating what silence could see. Redemption Creek Sheriff was a man named William Garrett, 52 years old and carved from the same stubborn granite as the mountains surrounding us. He'd been lawman here for 11 years, surviving 3 attempts on his life and maintaining order through a combination of reputation and ruthless pragmatism. Garrett was neither cruel nor kind. He was simply immovable, a force of nature that bent only when logic and evidence demanded it. Getting him to listen to a mute 9-year-old girl about a murder he hadn't heard about yet was going to require more than signs and gestures. Clara and I waited 30 minutes after the riders passed before heading into town. The settlement was waking up, saloon girls emptying chamber pots into the alley, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, miners already drunk or still drunk from the night before stumbling toward their claims. Redemption Creek wasn't civilized by any Eastern standard, but it had a rough order that men like Garrett enforced with iron consistency. The sheriff's office sat on the main street, a squat wooden building that smelled of gun oil, tobacco, and old coffee. Garrett was at his desk when we entered, studying a wanted poster with the intensity of a man who'd memorized every criminal face west of the Mississippi. He looked up as we came in, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to barely concealed irritation. "Jacob," he said, not unkindly, "what brings you in? Your claim been jumped." "Worse," I replied. "There's been a killing up on the high claims. 4 men came down the trail this morning, carrying what looked like stolen gold. Heavy saddlebags, blood on their clothes." Garrett's eyes sharpened. "You see this yourself?" Clara did. I gestured to my daughter, who stood beside me, her hands already moving. She felt them coming before they were in sight, watched them pass our cabin. The sheriff's expression closed like a door slamming. "Jacob, I respect that you're raising that girl alone, and I respect the challenges you face. But I can't investigate a crime based on what a deaf child thinks she might have seen." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. Clara, however, had anticipated this. She stepped forward before I could respond, pulling something from her pocket, a piece of charcoal she grabbed from our cabin's fireplace. She moved to Garrett's desk, found a blank piece of paper, and began to draw. Her hand moved with the certainty of someone who'd seen something so clearly that forgetting was impossible. She drew 4 men on horseback, each face rendered with disturbing accuracy despite her age. The first man had a distinctive scar running from his ear to his chin. The second was heavy-set, with a beard that reached mid-chest. The third wore a distinctive hat, wide-brimmed with a band of silver conchos. The fourth was lean, with eyes that Clara somehow conveyed as cruel even in simple charcoal lines. Garrett watched in silence. When Clara finished, she pushed the paper toward him and stepped back, her chin raised in defiance. The message was clear. I saw them. I remember them. You might not trust my silence, but can you ignore my witness? The sheriff studied the drawings for a long moment. His jaw worked, grinding through some internal calculation. Finally, he pulled open his desk drawer and retrieved a stack of wanted posters. He laid them out on the desk, scanning faces, matching features. His finger stopped on one poster, then another, then a third. Jesus Christ, he muttered. His eyes snapped to Clara. Girl, are you certain about these faces? The scar, the beard, the hat. Clara nodded emphatically. Garrett turned the wanted posters toward me. The Granger Gang, Caleb Granger, his brother Thomas, and their partners McCready and Lynch. They're wanted in 4 territories for murder, robbery, and worse. $2,500 reward for information leading to their capture. He looked at Clara with new respect and something else. Wariness. If she's right, if these bastards are in Redemption Creek, this whole settlement is in danger. The Grangers don't leave witnesses. Then you'll investigate? I asked. I'll ride up to the high claims, Garrett said, standing and strapping on his gun belt. Check if there's been a killing. If your daughter's right about that, I'll believe she's right about the faces. He paused, looking at Clara directly. You're sure about what you saw, girl? You understand what it means to accuse men like this. Clara didn't hesitate. She met his gaze and nodded once, firm and final. Garrett grunted. All right, Jacob, take her home and keep her there. If the Grangers are here and they get wind that someone can identify them, they'll come looking, and they won't care that she's a child. We left the sheriff's office with the morning sun climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the dusty street. The town continued its routine, unaware that 4 killers walked among them. Clara's hand found mine, and I felt her trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of what she'd set in motion. She'd made herself visible to dangerous men in order to bring them to justice. At 9 years old, my daughter had chosen courage over safety. By afternoon, Garrett returned. I saw him from our cabin, his horse moving at a gallop, dust rising behind him like smoke from a fire. He didn't stop at his office. He went straight to the saloon, then to the general store, then to the mine supervisor's quarters. Within an hour, the entire town knew. Samuel Hendricks, a prospector working the copper vein claim, had been found dead, shot 3 times, and left for the crows. His dust was gone. Approximately $800 worth of gold that represented 6 months of brutal labor. The Granger Gang had killed in Redemption Creek territory, and Mute Girl was the only witness who could identify them. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by our window, watching the town below. Lantern light flickered in windows. Men moved through streets, their voices carrying on the cold night air. Somewhere in that collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents, 4 murderers were waiting, planning their escape. They didn't know yet that a 9-year-old girl had seen their faces. Didn't know that justice was circling them like a hawk circles wounded prey. But Clara knew, and in the silence of her world, she was preparing for what came next. She gathered her tools, her mirror, her stones, her charcoal. Not toys, weapons, in the hands of someone who'd learned that the world spoke in languages most people had forgotten how to hear. The earth had carried the warning of their approach. Water had reflected their faces. Now silence itself would bring them down, if my daughter had anything to say about it. And Clara, I was learning, had more to say than anyone in Redemption Creek could possibly imagine. The challenge with truth is that it requires belief to become justice, and belief requires trust. Redemption Creek trusted Sheriff Garrett, trusted their own eyes and ears, trusted the world they could hear and touch. But trusting a 9-year-old girl who lived in silence, that demanded something most frontier folk didn't possess, imagination. By the second day after the murder, the town had split into factions. Some believed Clara's identification, mostly those who'd seen her strange abilities firsthand, who'd watched her predict weather changes or sense danger before it arrived. Others dismissed her entirely. The girls touched, they'd say, tapping their temples. Fever took more than her hearing, took her reason too. The Granger Gang, meanwhile, had gone to ground. They checked into the boarding house under false names, kept their heads down, their bandanas off. They looked like any other rough men seeking fortune in the mountains, indistinguishable from the 100 other desperate souls who flowed through Redemption Creek like water through a sluice box. Sheriff Garrett faced an impossible situation. He knew a murder had been committed, knew the likely perpetrators were in his town, but without more evidence, he couldn't arrest 4 armed men based solely on a child's drawings. The law required proof, and proof required the kind of testimony Clara couldn't give in a courtroom. Her silence, which had become her strength, was also her cage. I was in town purchasing supplies when I heard the confrontation. It came from outside the saloon, raised voices, the kind that draw crowds like blood draws sharks. I left Clara with Mrs. Brennan at the general store and pushed through the gathering crowd to see what was happening. Garrett stood facing 3 miners I recognized. Dutch Olson, a massive Swede who could bend horseshoes with his bare hands. Marcus Webb, a former Union soldier who'd come west after Appomattox. And Thomas Yates, young and hot-headed, barely 20. They'd been friends with Samuel Hendricks, the murdered prospector. "We don't need a trial," Dutch was saying, his accent thick with fury. "We know the Grangers did it. Everyone knows. We find them, we string them up, we move on. You know because a mute child drew some pictures." Garrett's voice was level, but his hand rested on his pistol. "That's lynch law, Dutch. That's the kind of justice that gets innocent men killed." "Then let's ask them straight," Marcus Webb interjected. "We go to the boarding house. Ask every stranger to show their faces, their papers. Anyone who runs is guilty. And if they don't run," Garrett countered, "if they stand there, innocent men accused by a mob, and demand to know their crime, what then? You go to explain that a girl who can't hear and can't speak has condemned them." The crowd murmured, uncertain. I could see both sides tearing at them. Justice delayed was justice denied, but justice rushed was murder dressed in legal clothing. That's when Clara appeared. Mrs. Brennan hadn't been able to hold her back once the commotion started. My daughter pushed through the crowd with the determination of someone who decided that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She carried her charcoal and paper, her mirror tucked in her dress pocket. She walked straight up to Sheriff Garrett and tugged his sleeve. When he looked down, she held up her drawing again, then pointed toward the boarding house. Her meaning was clear. "They're there. Let me show you." "Absolutely not," I said, reaching for her. "Clara, no. It's too dangerous." But Garrett was studying my daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read. Calculation mixed with something like respect. "What are you proposing, girl?" Clara's hands moved rapidly, but Garrett couldn't understand her signs, so she drew instead, quickly, herself walking past the boarding house, the mirror in her hand, for faces reflected. Then her, pointing at the wanted posters. Her, identifying them beyond doubt. "She wants to walk by the boarding house." I translated, horror rising in my throat. "Use her mirror to see their faces, without them seeing her looking. If she can confirm they're the Grangers by matching them to your wanted posters, you'll have enough to make arrests." "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not. She's 9 years old, Garrett. You can't use her as bait." "I'm not using her as anything," Garrett replied. "She's volunteering. And before you say she doesn't understand the danger, look at her face, Jacob. She understands perfectly." He was right. Clara's expression held no illusion, no childhood innocence. She knew exactly what she was proposing. Walking past dangerous men, studying them through reflected light, becoming the witness that could bring them to justice. She'd made the choice already. We were just catching up to it. The crowd had gone silent, watching this strange negotiation between a lawman, a father, and a child who couldn't speak, but was somehow louder than all of them. Finally, Dutch Olson spoke. Let her try. Girl's got more stones than half the men in this settlement. She wants to help. We should let her. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to grab Clara and ride out of Redemption Creek. Leave justice to others. Keep my daughter safe behind walls of distance and anonymity. But I also knew my daughter. Knew that if I forced her into safety, I'd be telling her that her silence made her useless. That her disability meant she couldn't contribute. That the world's cruelty had won, and she should accept her place as victim rather than agent. So I did the hardest thing a father can do. I trusted her. If she does this, I said to Garrett, I'm with her every step. And if those men so much as look at her wrong, I'll drop them where they stand. Garrett nodded. Fair enough. We'll do it tomorrow morning. Early, when the street's busy. They'll be less likely to notice one girl among the crowd. He looked down at Clara. You're brave, girl. Braver than most men I've known. But bravery and stupidity look the same right up until the moment you survive. Let's make sure we survive. That night, I tried one more time to talk Clara out of it. We sat by our fire, the cabin warm against the October cold creeping down from the peaks. I took her hands and made her look at me. You don't have to do this, I said, knowing she'd read my lips. There are other ways. We can wait for them to make a mistake. We can. Clara put her finger to my lips. Then she pulled out a piece of paper and wrote in careful letters, Papa. Mr. Hendricks died because he couldn't hear them coming. I can hear things no one else can. If I don't help, I'm saying my silence is a curse. I want it to be a gift. I read those words 3 times, each time feeling something break and rebuild in my chest. My daughter wasn't just seeking justice. She was seeking transformation, trying to turn the fever that had stolen her hearing into something meaningful. She was choosing to make her difference into her power. I pulled her close, held her tight, and whispered into her unhearing ear. You're already a gift, Clara. You always have been. She couldn't hear me, but somehow, I think she knew. The morning came cold and crystal clear, the kind of October day when the Sierra Nevada revealed itself in sharp relief against a sky so blue it ached. Frost clung to the shadows of buildings, and breath emerged in pale clouds from every mouth. The main street of Redemption Creek was busier than usual. Word had spread, despite Garrett's attempts at discretion, that something significant was happening today. Miners who should have been at their claims lingered in town. Shopkeepers found excuses to stand outside. Even the saloon girls, normally asleep until afternoon, watched from second-story windows. Everyone wanted to see if the mute girl could really identify killers. Sheriff Garrett had positioned himself in his office doorway, seemingly casual, but with his coat pulled back to show his pistol. Dutch Olson, Marcus Webb, and 2 other men who'd volunteered were scattered along the street, trying to look natural but failing. They were too tense, too watchful. If the Grangers were smart, and wanted men who'd survived this long usually were, they'd sense the trap being set. Clara wore her best dress, the blue one her mother had made before dying. She'd insisted on it, and I understood why. She wanted to look like what she was, a child going about innocent business. Her mirror was in her pocket, hidden from sight. Her charcoal and paper were tucked in the small bag she carried. To anyone watching, she was just Jacob Thornton's poor deaf daughter, running errands with her father. But her eyes held the focus of a hunter. We started at the far end of the street, walking slowly toward the boarding house. Clara held my hand, but loosely, ready to release it if she needed her hands free. As we walked, she did what she always did, observed. She watched how light fell through the gaps between buildings. She felt the rhythm of the street through her boots, the footfalls of men, the creak of wagon wheels, the vibration of horses tied to hitching posts. The boarding house loomed ahead, a 2-story structure with a wide porch where guests could sit and watch the street. 3 men occupied that porch now, drinking coffee in the cold morning. As we approached, Clara's hand tightened on mine for just a moment. I didn't look at the men, didn't want to give any sign we were interested in them. But Clara, in the natural way of children, let her gaze drift toward the porch as if merely curious. Then she stumbled, deliberately, I realized later, and her mirror tumbled from her pocket. It hit the dirt street without breaking, landing face up. Clara released my hand and bent to pick it up, but slowly, taking her time. And as she crouched there in the dust, she angled the mirror toward the porch. In that circle of reflected light, 3 faces appeared. I saw them too, looking down over Clara's shoulder. 2 of the men matched her drawings, the one with the scar from ear to chin, and the heavy-set one with the beard reaching his chest. The third was a stranger, not one of the Grangers, just an unfortunate guest who happened to be sharing their porch. Clara stood, dusting off her mirror, her face showing nothing. We continued walking past the boarding house toward the general store. Behind us, I heard no alarm, no sudden movement. The men on the porch had noticed nothing unusual, just a clumsy child dropping her toy. But we confirmed too. 2 of the 4 Grangers were sitting on that porch, bold as daylight, drinking coffee like they hadn't murdered Samuel Hendricks 2 days prior. We completed our circuit of the street, entering the general store where Mrs. Brennan greeted us warmly. Clara immediately found paper and began drawing, updating her sketches with new details she'd observed. The scar man wore a vest with silver buttons. The bearded man had a ring on his left hand, thick gold that caught light. These were identification marks that would hold up in court, details that couldn't be dismissed as a child's imagination. Sheriff Garrett entered the store moments later, his approach casual, but his eyes sharp. Well, Clara showed him her updated drawings and pointed toward the boarding house. Then she held up 2 fingers. 2 confirmed, I translated. The one's on the porch now, but the other 2, the one with the distinctive hat and the cruel-looking one, they weren't there. Garrett's jaw tightened. Could be inside, could be out of town. Either way, 2 is enough to start with. He studied Clara's drawings again, comparing them to the wanted posters he'd brought. The match was undeniable. Girl, you've got an artist's eye for detail. These drawings would convince any judge. So you'll arrest them? I asked. I'll arrest the 2 we can confirm, Garrett replied. But I need to do it smart. If the other 2 are nearby and we spook them, they'll run. Or worse, they'll shoot. He looked at Clara. Is there any way you can help us locate the other 2? Same trick with the mirror? Clara considered, then shook her head. But her hands moved, and though Garrett couldn't understand her signs, I could. She was proposing something else entirely. She wants to draw them, I explained, and show the drawings to people in town. Someone must have seen them. For men traveling together don't just disappear. They leave witnesses. We just have to find who saw them. It was a good plan, the kind of logical approach that used Clara's strengths without exposing her to direct danger. Garrett approved immediately, and within the hour, we created multiple copies of Clara's drawings and distributed them to shopkeepers, saloon workers, and anyone willing to look. The response came faster than expected. A stable hand recognized the man with the distinctive hat. He'd rented a horse yesterday evening and ridden toward the southern claims. The saloon owner recognized the 4th man, the one Clara had drawn with cruel eyes. He'd been drinking heavily the night before and was likely sleeping off the whiskey in one of the upstairs rooms. By noon, Garrett had assembled a plan. He'd arrest the 2 men on the boarding house porch first, quietly if possible. Then he'd move on the man in the saloon before he could wake and realize his companions were taken. The 4th man, if he was still out at the southern claims, would be tracked and arrested separately. You and Clara should go home, Garrett told me. This is law work now, and it's likely to turn ugly. You've done enough, more than enough. But Clara shook her head violently. She grabbed Garrett's arm and made a gesture we developed for mine. Hand over heart, then pointing. This was her hunt. She'd started it. She wanted to see it through. Garrett sighed, recognizing the same stubborn determination I'd been dealing with for 9 years. Fine, but you stay back. You stay quiet. He caught himself. You stay hidden. This goes wrong. Your father gets you out of town and doesn't look back. Agreed. Clara nodded solemnly. The arrest happened with the speed and precision of men who'd done violence before and expected to do it again. Garrett approached the boarding house porch with 2 deputies flanking him, all 3 men armed but not openly hostile. Clara and I watched from the general store window, 70 yards away, but with a clear view. Garrett spoke to the men on the porch. Even from this distance, I could see the moment recognition hit the Grangers, the sudden tension, the shift in posture. The scarred man reached for his weapon. Garrett's pistol was out faster, pressed to the man's forehead before the Granger's hand reached his holster. The bearded one started to rise, but Dutch Olson appeared from inside the boarding house, shotgun leveled, and the man froze. Within 30 seconds, both Grangers were on the ground, hands tied behind their backs, rage and disbelief warring on their faces. They'd been caught by superior speed and tactics, but also by something they couldn't have anticipated. A 9-year-old girl who could see through mirrors and feel danger through the earth itself. As Garrett and his men hauled the prisoners toward the jail, the scarred Granger's eye swept the street, searching for whoever had betrayed them. His gaze passed over the general store window where Clara stood watching. He couldn't have known she was his undoing. She was just another child in a frontier town full of them. Just another insignificant witness to other people's importance. But Clara knew, and I knew, and in that moment, watching 2 killers dragged to justice because my daughter had refused to let silence make her powerless, I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife died. Hope, not the desperate, grasping hope of men panning for gold, but the solid, earned hope of someone who'd watched the impossible become real. Clara turned from the window and looked up at me. Her hands moved in a question. Is it over? I wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that 2 arrests meant safety, meant we could return to our simple life at the creek. But I knew better. 2 Grangers remained free, and men like that didn't forgive betrayal. They wouldn't know yet who'd identified them, but they'd learn, and when they did, they'd come. So I signed back the truth. Not yet. Be ready. Clara nodded, understanding. She'd started this, knowing it wouldn't end clean. The earth had warned her of their approach. Now it would carry news of their captured brothers. And somewhere in the mountains, 2 killers would hear that news and make their choice. Run, or take revenge. My daughter had given them justice. Now we'd see if they returned mercy or murder. The remaining 2 Grangers, McCready with his silver bandit hat, and Lynch with his cruel eyes, learned of their brother's capture by sunset. Word traveled fast in mining settlements, carried on tongues loosened by whiskey and the human hunger for dramatic news. By nightfall, every soul in Redemption Creek knew that Sheriff Garrett had arrested 2 members of the infamous Granger Gang based on identification by Jacob Thornton's deaf daughter, which meant McCready and Lynch knew it too. I was splitting firewood behind our cabin when Clara's hand touched my shoulder. I turned to find her face pale, eyes wide with the expression I'd learned meant danger detected. Her palms pressed flat against the cabin wall, feeling vibrations I couldn't perceive. Then she pointed toward the trail leading up from town, the same trail the gang had descended 3 days earlier. 2 men, coming toward us. Fast. I didn't question, didn't waste time verifying. I grabbed Clara's hand and we ran, not toward town where help might be, but away from it, up into the foothills where the placer claims gave way to wilderness. If McCready and Lynch were coming for vengeance, I wouldn't lead them into Redemption Creek, where innocent people could be caught in crossfire. We reached the old mine shaft, just as twilight painted the mountains purple and gold. The shaft had been abandoned 5 years prior after a collapse killed 2 miners, and superstition kept most prospectors away. But I'd explored it with Clara during better times, and I knew it had a second entrance, a natural cave opening that connected to the man-made tunnels. We could hide there, wait out the night, emerge when help arrived. If help arrived, inside the shaft, darkness swallowed us whole. I grabbed a lantern but didn't dare light it. The glow would draw our hunters like moths to flame. Instead, we moved by touch and memory, Clara's hand in mine, her other hand trailing along the rough stone wall. In her world of permanent silence, darkness wasn't the disadvantage it was for me. She navigated by texture, by the change in air pressure, by senses I couldn't name. We'd gone perhaps 50 yards when Clara stopped. Her hand squeezed mine 3 times, our signal for extreme danger. Then she pointed back the way we'd come. I strained to hear, and finally caught it. Voices at the shaft entrance, harsh with anger. They came this way. Tracks lead straight here. It's a death trap. Shaft could collapse any moment. Then it'll be their grave as well as ours if we don't finish this. That girl identified Caleb and Thomas. She'll identify us too if given the chance. We kill her and the father. We disappear into the territories. No witnesses, no rope. Their logic was sound, and it chilled me to the bone. But they'd made one miscalculation. They assumed we were trapped. Clara tugged my hand, pulling me deeper into the shaft, toward the natural cave opening she remembered. We moved in absolute silence, easier for her than for me. Since she couldn't accidentally make noise, she couldn't hear. Behind us, lamplight bloomed. The Grangers had lit torches and were entering the shaft, their shadows dancing enormous on the walls. I could hear their boots on stone, the click of their weapons being readied. They were tracking us like wolves following wounded deer. Clara led me through a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber, the one with the natural ceiling opening that allowed moonlight to penetrate. In that pale illumination, I could see her face, see her thinking. She released my hand and moved to a pile of old mining timbers stacked against the chamber wall. Her hands moved in quick signs: trap, make noise, bring them here, collapse. She wanted to cause a controlled collapse, use the unstable shaft against our pursuers. It was brilliant and insane in equal measure. It could kill us as easily as them, but we had no other options. I helped Clara position the timbers, bracing them against support beams that already looked ready to fail. She found rocks, positioned them with the precision of someone who understood leverage and weight distribution better than most engineers. Then she pointed to the passage we'd just come through, our escape route, and made the sign for run. The Grangers' torchlight grew brighter. Their voices echoed through the passages, bouncing off stone until it sounded like a dozen men hunted us instead of 2. Clara climbed onto my back, her small arms wrapping around my neck. In her free hand, she held a large rock, the trigger for our trap. They entered the chamber, torches held high, weapons drawn. MacCready's silver headband gleamed in the firelight. Lynch's cruel face split into a smile when he saw us cornered. Nowhere left to run, Thornton. MacCready called. Hand over the girl, and maybe we let you live. Clara's arm moved. The rock flew from her hand with surprising force, striking the central timber she'd positioned. The timber cracked, shifted, and the sound it made was like the mountain itself groaning. The support beams shuddered. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and in the half-second before everything came down, I ran. I ran through the narrow passage with Clara clinging to my back. Ran while the chamber behind us filled with the thunder of falling stone. Ran while the screams of MacCready and Lynch were swallowed by tons of rock. We burst from the natural cave opening into cold night air just as the entire shaft system collapsed inward, sealing itself and its dead beneath the mountain. Clara and I lay on the ground, gasping, covered in dust, alive by margins thinner than prayer. When we finally made it back to Redemption Creek near midnight, we found Sheriff Garrett organizing a search party. He took one look at us, filthy, exhausted, but whole, and understood that the Granger Gang story had reached its conclusion. The next morning, miners confirmed the old shaft had completely collapsed. If there were bodies inside, they'd stay there forever, entombed in the mountain they tried to use as an execution chamber. It was fitting, in a way. Men who'd killed a prospector for gold, buried in the very earth they'd stolen from. 3 weeks after the shaft collapse, life in Redemption Creek had found a new rhythm. The territorial marshal had come and gone, taking Caleb and Thomas Granger back for trial. The reward money, $2,500, had been paid to Clara in a ceremony that drew the entire settlement. She'd stood on the sheriff's office steps, unable to hear the applause, but feeling the vibrations of it through the wooden planks. and for the first time since the fever, I saw something like joy on her face. But the real change wasn't measured in reward money or captured criminals. It was measured in how the town looked at my daughter. Mrs. Brennan at the general store learned basic signs to communicate with Clara. Dutch Olson carved her beautiful wooden case for her mirror and charcoal. Young Thomas Yates, the hot-headed miner, appointed himself her unofficial guardian, making sure no one spoke poorly of the girl who sees what others miss. The old tracker who'd once dismissed Clara as touched came to our cabin one evening with an unusual request. He had a granddaughter back east who'd lost her hearing to scarlet fever, same as Clara. Would Clara write to her? Share how she'd learned to navigate a world not built for silence? Clara agreed, and thus began a correspondence that would last years. Letters filled with drawings and descriptions of how to feel storms approaching through pressure changes, how to read lips and faces, how to use reflection and vibration as tools rather than accepting disability as limitation. Sheriff Garrett offered me a position as his deputy, saying that a man who'd raised a child like Clara understood observation and patience better than most lawmen. I accepted, and Clara became an unofficial consultant on cases requiring attention to detail the rest of us overlooked. She could spot lies in body language, could track people through the disturbed dust they left behind, could solve mysteries using senses we didn't know we'd forgotten. But the most significant change came one December morning, 6 weeks after the Granger incident. Redemption Creek's small bank, really just a reinforced room in the assayer's office, was set to receive a gold shipment from the consolidated claims. $20,000 worth of dust, the largest concentration of wealth the settlement had seen in years. Clara and I were in town for supplies when she suddenly grabbed my arm, her face going white, her palms pressed to the wooden sidewalk, and I saw her counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 what? Then she pointed to the bank and made a gesture I'd never seen before, her hands coming together, then exploding outward. An explosion. My blood turned to ice. I ran for the bank, Clara at my heels, and burst through the door where 3 men were preparing the vault for the gold shipment. Get out, I shouted. Everyone out. Now. They stared at me like I'd lost my mind, but Garrett, who'd been overseeing security, saw Clara's face and didn't hesitate. Move. Everybody out. He grabbed the assayer bodily and shoved him toward the door. We'd cleared perhaps 20 yards when the explosion ripped through the bank. The blast was enormous, shattering windows 3 buildings away, sending a mushroom of dust and debris skyward. If we'd been inside, we'd have been obliterated. In the chaos that followed, Garrett and his men found the evidence. The Granger's accomplice, a man we'd never suspected, had planted dynamite in the bank's foundation, timed to explode during the gold shipment. He planned to blame the mine company, start a riot in the confusion, and steal the gold in the mayhem. But he hadn't counted on a 9-year-old girl who could feel the dynamite's fuse burning through vibrations in the earth itself, who could sense the approaching explosion through channels of awareness the rest of us had abandoned. Clara had saved the town. Again, that evening, the settlement held an impromptu gathering. No formal ceremony, just people coming together in gratitude and something deeper, recognition. Recognition that the child they pitied, the girl they dismissed as broken, had been whole all along. More than whole. She'd been learning a language they'd forgotten they spoke. A way of reading the world that civilization had trained out of them. An old Apache trader who sometimes came through town approached Clara. Through an interpreter, he told her that his people had a word for those like her. Earth listeners. Individuals whose disability in the hearing world became profound ability in the natural one. They were considered touched by spirits, blessed rather than cursed. Clara smiled at that. She'd never needed the town's acceptance to know her worth, but receiving it felt like the fever's final grip releasing its hold on her life's trajectory. As winter settled over the Sierra Nevada and our cabin grew warm with the wood ice split and the gold dust that now secured our future, Clara sat by the fire and drew. Not crime scenes or criminals this time, but something else. Landscapes she'd felt but never heard. Mountains singing in wind she couldn't hear. Rivers whose music existed in vibration rather than sound. A world that spoke in silence to those patient enough to listen. I watched her work, this daughter who'd been given deafness by fever, and turned it into a gift that saved lives. She taught Redemption Creek that silence wasn't absence. It was presence in another form. That disability wasn't weakness. It was difference that could become strength. And as snow began to fall outside our window, each flake landing with a vibration Clara could feel through the cabin floorboards, I understood something profound. She'd never lost anything. She'd simply learned a new language, one the rest of us were only beginning to understand. The earth spoke to Clara. Water reflected her truth. Silence carried her justice. And Redemption Creek, a town that had once pitied the deaf girl, now understood that sometimes the people we think need saving are the ones who end up saving us all. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.